There are some buildings that no longer exist on any map, not because nature erased them, but because someone wanted them forgotten. Sometimes a building is burned not to destroy what it was, but to destroy what it witnessed. Belmont Plantation in Charleston County is one of those places. For decades, people whispered that something unnatural happened there, something so dark that even the local authorities refused to speak of it. And when the truth finally surfaced, hidden behind a crumbling wall during the Great Fire of 1891, it revealed that 47 people entered a private surgical room on that property, and none of them were ever seen alive again. Now let us go back to where it began. Part 1. The year was 1847, and Charleston was a place of elegance and contradiction. Along its cobblestone streets were beautiful homes, polite gatherings, and respected doctors who studied in Europe. Yet behind those same streets was an economy built on forced labor, suffering, and silence. The city lived in both brilliance and cruelty, and sometimes those worlds touched in terrible ways. Dr. Silas Thornwell arrived that year as a stranger. He was 34 years old, quiet, intelligent, and very careful with his words. His hair was already thinning, and his posture was always straight, as if he held himself together with sheer will. He told people he had studied medicine in Edinburgh and London. He brought letters of introduction from men who claimed he was a rising star in surgical science. That was enough to open doors. During his early months in Charleston, many physicians met him at dinners or lectures. They remembered the same things about him. His voice was calm, his hands hardly shook, even when handling instruments. And no matter how conversations began, they always returned to one idea. The idea that organs inside the human body could be replaced like parts in a machine. Others laughed at the idea. They said it was impossible. They reminded him that the body rejected anything foreign. They pointed to the history of attempts to use animal blood in humans, all of which ended in death. But Thornwell did not laugh and did not let the subject go. He believed that if one could find a way to convince the body to accept the new organ, then sickness and death could be conquered. He spoke of this not as speculation, but as destiny. Even those who doubted him said there was something intense behind his eyes. A hunger that did not belong to ordinary men. Thornwell was wealthy. He had inherited money from his family in Connecticut. With that wealth, he purchased Belmont Plantation, a failing rice property about 15 miles outside the city. The land was quiet. The main house needed repairs. The previous owner had ruined the plantation with debt and negligence. The enslaved people living there were already suffering when Thornwell arrived. When Thornwell took over, he told the enslaved community that the fields would no longer be worked for rice. He said they would help him with research instead. At first, this sounded like relief. Less backbreaking labor, fewer days in mud-filled fields. But no one knew what kind of work Thornwell was planning, because he did not explain it. He only smiled politely and said it was medical science. The old overseer cottage on the property was taken apart board by board. Workers from Charleston were hired to rebuild it. They believed it was to become a medical study building or a recovery ward. But as they worked, some spoke in whispers among themselves. Something about the structure felt wrong. Large windows were added along one wall to let in as much light as possible. The center room was fitted with a heavy wooden table made of white oak. The carpenters were asked to attach metal rings to the table. When they asked why, Thornwell said they were to keep patients still during fevers. The workers wanted to believe that answer. They had families. They needed the money. They chose not to ask more questions. The room next to the surgical table was lined with 8 narrow beds. Each bed also had restraints. The workers shared uneasy glances. A medical recovery room did not require such control. They knew that. Everyone knew, but no one wanted to be the one to speak it aloud. On the opposite side of the building, Thornwell designed a series of animal enclosures. They were sturdy, too sturdy. The floors had carved channels that sloped toward drains. The doorways were narrow and reinforced with iron. A covered walkway connected these pens directly to the surgical room. This was not ordinary animal housing. Something was meant to move through that hallway often. And whatever that something was, Thornwell did not want other people to see it. By early 1847, the construction was done. Thornwell began buying animals. Not just common ones for study, but animals specifically chosen for their organs. 2 large hogs known for their strong hearts. 3 sheep with unusual lung capacity. And most disturbing of all, a young chimpanzee brought to Charleston by a sailor. People in the city whispered when they saw the animal. It was intelligent. It watched people with an expression far too human. The chimpanzee was taken to Belmont quietly, through back roads. The enslaved people at Belmont were ordered to tend to the animals. They were told to bring them water and food. They were told never to speak of what they saw. Overseer Virgil Rayburn enforced this with violence. One night, when the moon was bright, a woman named Eliza, who worked in the kitchen of the main house, saw Thornwell carry notebooks across the yard. She watched him walk into the surgical building and close the door behind him. Light glowed from the windows until dawn. She heard low animal cries that did not sound like pain, but something like fear. No one asked her what she heard. And she did not tell. Because even then, before the first experiment began, the air around Belmont Plantation felt different. Heavy. Waiting. Something terrible was about to start. And 47 lives would never leave that building again. If you'd like, I can now continue with part 2, where the first surgeries begin and the true horror takes shape. Just tell me. Continue part 2. Part 2. Hook. Some evil does not arrive with thunder or loud warning. Sometimes it enters quietly, wearing polite manners, attending Sunday service, shaking hands, and smiling. It sits among ordinary people while planning extraordinary harm. That was Dr. Silas Thornwell. Charleston saw a man of learning. The enslaved people at Belmont saw something else entirely. They saw a shadow walking around in human form. A shadow that had begun to choose who would live and who would die. Now the second experiment was about to begin. Part 2. Dr. Silas Thornwell attended church every Sunday. He sat near the front, upright, respectful, his hands folded. He moved his lips when hymns were sung, but no one ever heard his voice. Observers noticed that small detail later. Silence can tell more about a man than any words. He held dinners for local doctors and spoke beautifully about progress, knowledge, and the advancement of mankind. He served fine wine. He quoted European medical lectures. He talked about curing diseases. Everyone nodded in approval. What a visionary, they said. What a noble mind. But they never asked what exactly he was doing at Belmont. And he never offered to tell them. The enslaved community at the plantation understood far sooner than Charleston society ever would. They watched the building being completed. They heard the pigs, sheep, and the chimpanzee in the pens. They saw Thornwell crossing the yard late at night, journal always in his hand. They recognized the way he looked at them. That look was not curiosity. It was possession. It was calculation. No one understood this more clearly than Dinah. Dinah was 42. She had lived on the plantation her entire life. She had buried more loved ones than she could bear to remember. She had learned to survive by reading people as carefully as scripture. She could look at a person and know whether danger lived behind their eyes. The first time she saw Thornwell examine one of the enslaved men with his journal open, writing as the man breathed, coughed, lifted his arms, and sat still on command, she felt a terrible cold settle into her bones. He does not see a person, she whispered to her daughter Clara one evening while they prepared cornmeal. He sees pieces. Pieces he wants to take apart. Clara tried to soothe her. Clara was young and expecting her first child. She believed, or perhaps needed to believe, that Thornwell would stay distant. We just have to stay quiet and do our work, she said. Dinah shook her head slowly. You cannot hide from a man who believes he owns the right to your breath. Winter turned to early spring. The air grew wet, heavy, thick with the smell of the marshes. And then came the day that changed everything. On February 18, Thornwell called the overseer, Virgil Rayburn, to his study. Rayburn came in with the slow, uneasy steps of a man who did not like to be alone with his employer. He later described the conversation during an inquiry, though whether he told the truth is impossible to know now. Thornwell presented a list. On it were names. Not random names, but names of enslaved people with certain qualities. Good physical condition. Young enough to endure surgery. showing symptoms of weaknesses that Thornwell wished to study. The first name was Augustus. He had a cough, but he still worked as hard as any man. He did not seem near death. Yet Thornwell had watched him. He had written about him. And now he had chosen him. The second name was Pearl. Pearl was 26. Gentle, kind. She tired easily. Her heart fluttered sometimes. Thornwell had measured her pulse many times and wrote long notes afterward. "I will need them moved to the medical building," Thornwell said, calm as still water. "Tell them they are receiving treatment. Tell them it is to help them." Rayburn nodded, but something shifted in his expression. Before he could speak, Thornwell continued. "They will go. There is no choice to give. The decision was final. There was no appeal." 2 days later, Augustus walked into the surgical building. He believed, or hoped, that he was being treated. But he did not walk out. Dinah heard the sounds that night. Not screaming. Screaming would have been easier to bear. Instead, she heard something like a person trying to cry out with a mouth held shut. A heavy struggle against leather restraints. The sound of life being pulled away slowly. When Thornwell walked out of the building at dawn, his boots had been cleaned, but not perfectly. There were dark stains near the seams. Dinah felt her heart break inside her chest. She whispered only 3 words. "He killed him." Augustus was buried at the edge of the plantation in an unmarked grave. Rayburn told the community that Augustus had died from his illness. No one believed it, but belief was a luxury they could not afford. 3 days passed. Then Thornwell came for Pearl. Pearl did not cry. She asked only one question. "Will I come back to my husband?" No one answered her. She was taken to the surgical building and laid on the same white oak table. Thornwell recorded her pulse. He placed his fingers on her chest. He noted every movement of her breath. He prepared instruments with perfect care. His face held no emotion, only focus. In his journal later, he wrote that this would be a partial transplant. Not replacing the heart, only attaching supply tissue from a lamb, to test whether the heart could be strengthened. He wrote as though he was repairing a machine. Pearl trusted him for the first few minutes. Then the restraints tightened. Then the knife touched skin. By the time she understood what was happening, suffering had already begun. There was no anesthesia. There was no mercy. Only the sound of breathing turning into gasping. Only the sound of a heart failing. The journal entry for that night was short. Subject expired from cardiac failure. Technique insufficient. Notes suggest tissue placement may require adjustment. Further attempts warranted. That was all her life became in his records. Dinah stood outside the next morning as the burial took place. She did not cry. She did not collapse. She only said one thing. "It has begun." And everyone understood what she meant. Because there were many names in Thornwell's journal. Far more than 2. The plantation had entered a season of horror. And it was far from over. Ready for part 3, I will continue with the growing fear among the enslaved community, the arrival of the chimpanzee's role, and the first signs that the authorities already knew. Just tell me. Continue part 3. Part 3. Hook. There are times when evil does not hide. It works in the open. It walks the same roads as everyone else, eats at the same tables, prays in the same church pews. And yet no one stops it. Not because they do not see it, but because seeing it clearly would require courage. And courage was something too few had at Belmont in the spring of 1847. By the time the 20th body was buried, the horror was no longer a rumor. It was a daily breath. A shadow that touched every heart. And the doctor was not finished yet. Part 3. Pearl died on the night of February 23. The donor animal had been a young lamb. She survived 6 hours after the operation before the pain and the strain on her heart became too great. The death was quiet. The burial was done before sunrise. Her body joined Augustus in the same distant corner of the plantation grounds where the earth was beginning to show the shape of repeated digging. After Pearl, a rhythm formed. Every 3 or 4 days another person disappeared into the medical building. Thornwell worked like a man on a schedule, not like someone questioning the morality of his actions. He adjusted his methods with each attempt. He made notes. He studied the results. He changed variables as if the people he operated on were laboratory samples instead of human lives. Subject 3. Subject 4. Subject 5. The journal pages showed no grief. No hesitation. Only clinical language. No names were written. Only numbers. By early March, the enslaved community was living in constant fear. 4 had already died. Everyone understood that weakness had become a death sentence. People stopped reporting illness. Children were told to smile and appear energetic even when exhausted. Women hid symptoms from each other. Men lied about pain in their joints and muscles. Everyone learned that silence could be the difference between living another day and being taken. But fear did not protect them. On March 12, Thornwell chose Dinah. Her crime was not sickness alone. It was knowledge. She had been the healer. She had known things Thornwell did not. She had questioned with her eyes, even if her mouth never spoke against him. And he did not tolerate minds he could not own. Rayburn came to her door. He told her the doctor wanted to treat her. Dinah already understood what this meant. She did not scream. She did not plead. She hugged her daughter Clara, pressed her lips to her forehead, and whispered the location of the herbs she had hidden for months. Then she walked forward without resistance. If she had fought, they would have held her down anyway. She chose dignity where she could. She lived through the night. Thornwell tried to replace part of her stomach using tissue from a pig. She suffered for 11 hours. Her final words, recorded by Thornwell himself, were simple. God see you. She died at dawn. Her death was the breaking point. Clara's grief rose like a storm. She held her mother's memory in her chest and refused to let it suffocate her. Instead, she looked for someone who might listen. The only person she could think of was Reverend Thomas Alston. He had visited the plantation many times to preach quiet sermons to the enslaved people. He was not a brave man, but he had shown small kindnesses, and small kindnesses can give desperate hope. Clara found him during one of his visits and told him everything. She told him about the building, the surgeries, the screams that were not screams but something worse, the graves. Alston listened. His face grew pale, his hands shook, but when Clara asked him to help, he hesitated. He told himself there must be an explanation. That a trained doctor would not commit such horrors. That perhaps the girl was overwhelmed by grief. He promised to look into it. Then he left. And he did nothing. His hesitation cost lives. Thornwell's work continued through March into April. He became faster with his instruments. He learned how to open a body with less bleeding. He learned how to keep a person alive longer during the procedure. But no matter how carefully he worked, the bodies always rejected the animal tissue. Still he continued. 19 people were gone by late April. The enslaved population had fallen nearly in half. Even white plantation owners in Charleston began to question why so many were dying. Thornwell explained that disease had taken hold. He spoke of respiratory fever, heart weakness. He used medical terms his audience did not fully understand. He gave large donations to the Medical Society Library. People nodded and accepted his words because it was easier than admitting something monstrous was happening. But one man did not accept silence. His name was Dr. Edmund Whitlock. He had seen enough to feel that something was terribly wrong. He asked questions Thornwell did not want to answer. He requested a visit to the medical building. Thornwell denied him. The refusal troubled Whitlock deeply. The law, however, offered no protection. In South Carolina, enslaved people were property. Property could be used however its owner wished. Even doctors who suspected the truth had no legal power to intervene. Meanwhile, life at Belmont grew darker. People avoided Thornwell's gaze. Meals were silent. Work was done with shaking hands. Mothers prayed with their children in the early hours of dawn. On May 3, Clara gave birth to a daughter. The women delivered the baby themselves. No one dared call Thornwell for help. She named the child Dinah, after the woman who had tried to save them all. The child was a blessing, but also a reminder of how dangerous the world around them had become. Thornwell's journal from May showed a new shift in his thinking. He no longer believed the problem was surgical skill. Now he believed the issue was the quality of the subjects themselves. He wrote that the enslaved people were too weak from labor and diet to survive the shock of surgery. Therefore he would now select only the strongest, the healthiest, the people most capable of survival. This meant death would Now come for those who looked well. On May 14th, he selected Benjamin. Benjamin was strong, intelligent, quiet. He had no illness at all. His only fault was being exactly what Thornwell now wanted. The surgery happened the next night. Thornwell attempted to replace part of his kidney using tissue from a young ram. Benjamin lived for 4 days. 4 days of agony. His death was slower than the others. The journal recorded it as acute organ failure. He was the 20th victim. And still the doctor continued. Because no one had yet found the courage to stop him. If you want, I am ready to begin part 4 next. Should I continue? Engaging hook. Sometimes horror does not arrive with screams or shadows. Sometimes it comes politely, wearing a clean coat and carrying a silver instrument case. At Belmont Plantation, Death walked calmly, spoke softly, and wrote careful notes in a leather journal. And by the spring of 1847, everyone understood that when Dr. Thornwell looked at you for too long, your life might already be ending. Part 4. The Whispering Fear. By late May 1847, Belmont was no longer a place of labor and survival. It had become a waiting room for death. The enslaved people moved with quiet purpose, speaking softly, avoiding the doctor's gaze. Work continued because work was required, but every movement was shaped by fear. The fields were not filled with songs as they once had been during harvest seasons. The quarters no longer echoed laughter in the evenings. Silence had taken root in the air itself. Everyone knew the truth now. The medical building was not a place of healing. It was where life was ended piece by piece, under the cover of science and ambition. Thornwell recorded his experiments with increasing precision. His journal grew heavier with each passing week. The handwriting shifted from steady lines to slanted, crowded words that spilled to the very edges of each page. Something was changing inside him. He had stopped writing names altogether. Subjects were numbers. Failures were data points. Deaths were steps toward a goal only he believed existed. Clara lived every hour in quiet panic. She carried her newborn daughter strapped close to her chest, the small girl warm and soft against her. The child's name was Dinah, a name spoken in memory of her grandmother, whose strength had once held the community together. Clara whispered stories and prayers into the tiny ear of the baby who had never known peace. Many believed Clara was the next likely subject. She was young, she was strong, she had survived childbirth. Thornwell had already shown interest in her. People watched her carefully, offering help, offering warnings, offering prayers. But the doctor had not chosen her again. Not yet. Instead, Thornwell had turned his eyes toward Benjamin's younger brother, Samuel. Samuel was 19, tall, quick-handed, and known for his bright singing voice. He led chants in the fields. He could take a broken shovel and repair it like new. He still spoke of hope. That made him dangerous. Hope was the one thing Thornwell's work could not tolerate. Thornwell observed Samuel for several days, writing quietly as Samuel worked. He made notes on posture, muscle tone, breathing patterns. Samuel pretended not to notice, but everyone in the field saw it. The watching was the first step. The selection always followed. That night, the quarters gathered around Samuel. Some urged him to hide. Others urged him to run. But Samuel only shook his head. Running meant death. Fighting meant torture. Hiding meant others would be taken in his place. He looked at Clara, then at the baby in her arms, and said that if survival was possible, it would not come through fear alone. Someone had to act, but action could not be rushed. Action required planning. Action required allies. Samuel remembered the story Clara had told about Reverend Alston, the white minister who had listened but had done nothing. That failure still burned in Clara's chest like a brand. But Samuel believed that even a frightened man sometimes changed when the truth grew too large to ignore. He decided he would speak to the minister himself. 3 nights later, when the plantation slept, Samuel slipped out. The moon was bright. The trees were quiet. He moved through the woods like a shadow, stepping gently, knowing that dogs could be called at any moment. He walked 8 miles to a small chapel where Alston sometimes slept after evening prayers. The minister was startled awake by Samuel's sudden appearance. For a moment, he was too afraid to speak. But Samuel did not yell or threaten. He simply stood there, breathing hard, and told him everything. The surgeries, the deaths, the graves, the journal. Alston's face changed as he listened. The horror Clara had spoken of now felt impossible to ignore. Samuel's voice did not shake. His words were clear. No one could hear this and dismiss it as misunderstanding. Alston felt sickness settle into his chest. He had waited too long. He had done nothing. And while he waited, people had died. But fear ran deep. Even now, Alston hesitated. Men like Thornwell were protected. Wealth shielded them. Society defended them. Speaking against them meant offense. Offense meant consequences. Samuel saw the hesitation, and for the first time in weeks, he lost control of his voice. He said the words slowly, angrily, painfully. If you do nothing, God will remember. Their blood will not leave your hands. The minister trembled, but this time, he did not brush the warning aside. Something inside him broke. He agreed to write letters. Not to one person, but to several. Doctors, authorities, church leaders, men who might have enough influence to force a formal investigation. Samuel nodded. It was not enough, but it was a beginning. He left before dawn and made the walk back to Belmont. He returned to the quarters trembling with fatigue. Clara embraced him when he stepped inside. No words were needed. For the first time in months, there was a whisper of hope. But the walls of Belmont had ears. Rayburn, the overseer, had seen Samuel returning through the trees. The sight planted suspicion in his mind. He did not speak of it. Not yet, but suspicion was all a place like Belmont needed to start burning again. 3 days later, disaster struck. Thornwell came to the quarters at sunrise, journal under his arm, eyes already fixed on Samuel. The selection had been made. Samuel did not run, but neither did he walk forward alone. For the first time, others stepped forward with him. Clara, Isaac's cousin Daniel, 2 older women who had once worked as nurses. They did not speak. They only stood between Thornwell and Samuel. It was not escape. It was not rebellion. It was a line drawn in silence. Thornwell stared at them, astonished that they would dare stand in his way. But the overseer reached for his whip, and the illusion of resistance began to crack. The moment could not hold. The power imbalance was too large. Yet something had changed. Something had been awakened. Samuel was taken. The medical building door shut. The screaming began 2 hours later. It continued until night, and when it stopped, Belmont Plantation fell silent again. But the silence was not the same. This time it was not fear. It was waiting, because Samuel had not returned. But neither had Thornwell, and no one knew what had happened inside that building. Not yet. Tell me when you're ready for part 5. Engaging hook. By the summer of 1847, Belmont Plantation felt like a place caught between 2 worlds. By day, the fields still moved with slow labor and quiet orders. By night, every soul lay awake, waiting to hear footsteps outside their door. But after Samuel's surgery, something changed. Whispers moved like wind through the quarters. No one had seen what happened inside the medical building that day. No one saw Thornwell afterward. And when a rumor begins in a place made of fear, it grows fast. Part 5. What happened to Samuel? The morning after Samuel was taken, the plantation was drowned in a strange quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air has weight. The rising sun spilled light across the fields, but no one stepped forward to begin work. No one sang. No one spoke. Every pair of eyes stayed fixed on the medical building. The door remained closed. Clara held her baby tight against her chest, the child's breathing soft and steady. Her heart beat fast and uneven. She kept thinking of Samuel's face the night he returned from speaking to Reverend Alston. His face had been tired, yes, but there was something else in it too. Something like belief. If Samuel still believed they might survive, then maybe they could. But the hours passed. The sun rose higher. The building stayed locked. Finally, near midday, Rayburn the overseer walked toward the medical building. His boots crushed the gravel path. He knocked on the door once. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Still nothing. His hand hovered near the pistol on his belt. Then he tried the door handle. It opened. Rayburn stepped inside and disappeared from view. Moments later, he stumbled back out. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. He turned and shouted for two men to follow him. Together, they carried something wrapped in a canvas sheet. They walked to the burial ground behind the stables. They dug a grave quickly. No prayers, no markers. But the people watching from the shadows were not looking at the grave. They were watching the medical building's door. Thornwell had not emerged. The doctor who kept records, who made notes with steady hands, who always took pride in control, had not come out at all. That absence became a wildfire. By evening, the rumor had grown into something sharp and bright. Some said Samuel had fought back. Some said the surgery had gone wrong. Some whispered that Samuel had stood up from the table after the procedure, eyes still open, blood still moving, long after he should have died. Some said the doctor had seen something in Samuel's eyes that terrified him. Fear and hope often look the same in the dark. But the truth would not stay hidden for long. That night, Clara sat outside with the baby asleep in her arms. The air was warm. Fireflies blinked in the grass. She looked at the sky and tried to imagine her grandmother's voice. The voice that had always known how to lead, how to soothe, how to stand strong. Then she heard quiet footsteps behind her. It was Daniel, the man who had stood beside Samuel on the day of his selection. His hands were shaking. His face was tense with something fierce. He had seen inside the medical building. He had seen what was left. He sat beside Clara and began to speak in a low voice, one meant for her alone, but which soon gathered others nearby, drawn by the gravity of truth. Daniel had waited for night to fall. When Rayburn and the other men left, Daniel had crept to the building and slipped through a side door. The smell hit him first. Iron, rot, something burnt, something wrong. The operating table was covered in dried blood. The tools were scattered everywhere like they had been thrown. The floor had scratch marks in it. Deep marks, like something had clawed the floorboards. And Thornwell was there, not dead, but broken. He sat in the corner of the room, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around them, his face pale and terrified. His eyes stared at the doorway, like he was still seeing something that was not there anymore. Daniel whispered that Thornwell had not looked like a man. He had looked like a child who had seen something far too big. Something he could not understand. When Thornwell spoke, his voice was thin. He said one thing over and over. He looked at me. Daniel asked what he meant. Thornwell did not explain. He only kept repeating the phrase. His voice was cracked. His mind was somewhere else. And Samuel was gone. Not on the table. Not in the room. Not in the building. Gone. No body. No blood trail. No sign of where he had gone. Daniel swore it was true. Everyone listening felt the air tighten. If Samuel's body was not there, then where was he? Was he alive? Was he buried elsewhere? Had he gotten up from the table? Clara felt her heart hammer in her chest. Not from fear, from something else. From something that felt like the first spark of fire in a deep, dark night. Hope could be dangerous. Hope could get a person killed. But hope was also the only thing that could lead a person forward. In the days that followed, Thornwell isolated himself. He stopped visiting the quarters. He stopped choosing subjects. He stayed in the medical building, door closed, shutters drawn. He wrote nothing. His journal did not move from the desk. He worked on nothing. Not surgery. Not research. Nothing. Rayburn tried to force him to continue, reminding him that the plantation owner expected results. But Thornwell barely responded. His eyes were distant. His hands trembled. He was not the same man anymore. Something had changed him, and whatever had happened during Samuel's surgery had taken the heart out of his certainty. Meanwhile, Reverend Alston's letters reached Charleston, and the men who read them did not dismiss them. They talked quietly among themselves. They compared the number of deaths. They compared Thornwell's evasive answers. They followed the money spent on supplies. And slowly, a shape of truth began to form. But Belmont did not need outside men to understand what was coming. Because 3 nights later, someone saw Samuel, not inside the plantation, but at the edge of the woods. Standing still in the dark. Watching Belmont. Watching the medical building. Watching the place where death had lived. And his eyes were open. Engaging hook. They said Samuel was dead. They said no one survived the table. They said no one ever left that medical building alive. But now people whispered that Samuel had been seen at the tree line just before dawn. His body thin, his posture wrong, his eyes dark and watching. And if Samuel had returned from the table, then the dead were no longer staying dead. Part 6. The morning after the sighting, Belmont Plantation felt like it had been turned inside out. People tried to work, but their hands shook. Every sound made someone flinch. The sky felt too bright, the air too still. Fear had ruled Belmont for months, but this was different. This was fear mixed with anticipation. Hope was rising, but it was tangled and sharp and dangerous. Clara could not stop thinking about the woods. She sat on the steps outside the quarters, her baby asleep in her lap, and her gaze rested on the tree line. Her heart beat slow and heavy. She remembered how Samuel used to stand when he was thinking. One hand resting at his side. The other curled like he was holding something invisible. The figure in the woods had stood like that. But the face had been wrong. His eyes were open wide, unblinking. Not scared, not confused, empty, like something was missing behind them. The things that return are not always the things that left. People said that in whispers now. Daniel came to her just after sunrise. He knelt beside her and spoke quietly. He had seen Thornwell again. The doctor had barely slept. He moved like a man struck by lightning. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, his hands shook constantly. He kept muttering that Samuel was a miracle, but his voice did not sound proud. It sounded terrified. A miracle should be something you welcome. But Thornwell did not welcome Samuel. He feared him. Daniel said Thornwell had locked himself inside the medical building and pushed furniture against the door. This was the same man who had once walked Belmont like he owned the air itself. Now he stayed hidden like a hunted animal. Something had broken inside him. Rayburn was furious. He needed Thornwell to keep the plantation operating. The owner was due to visit in a matter of weeks. If the doctor failed to show results, there would be consequences for everyone. Rayburn shouted. He threatened. He even pounded on the locked door. Thornwell did not open it. Not even to speak. Rayburn had grown violent in frustration. He began lashing out at the enslaved workers again. His cruelty was familiar, but now it was fueled by fear. Fear made him sloppy. Fear made him unpredictable. The people of Belmont knew what that meant. Survival depended on silence, on caution, on watching for danger in every direction. But something else had begun to grow too. A quiet agreement, a shared understanding, something that did not need words. Samuel had returned. Whether he was alive or something else did not matter anymore. He had returned. Later that night, Clara heard footsteps near the quarters. She looked out her window and saw Daniel moving toward the woods. He motioned to her. She tucked her baby in a blanket with another woman she trusted and followed him. The moon was bright enough to cast long shadows across the grass. The trees stood like dark pillars. The woods felt alive. Daniel did not speak until they were close to the tree line. He said someone had seen Samuel again. Closer this time. Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her heart beat fast. She felt her mother's courage in her chest. The woods smelled of pine and wet dirt. A wind moved the branches above them. Then they saw him. Samuel stood between two tall pines. His body was thin. His shirt was torn. His chest rose and fell, but too slowly, like breathing was something he remembered how to do but did not fully understand. His skin had taken on a pale, gray tone. And his eyes were open wide, staring straight at them. Clara called his name softly. Not loudly, not fearfully, like she was calling him inside from a long walk home. Samuel did not move. He did not blink. Then he turned. Not all at once. Not naturally. His head turned first, then his shoulders. His body followed with a lagging delay, like he was remembering how to inhabit himself. He began to walk away, deeper into the woods. Clara took a step to follow. Daniel grabbed her arm. His grip was desperate, the kind of grip that says if you go I will lose you. Clara looked one last time into the dark. Samuel did not look back. When they returned to the quarters, Clara felt more awake than she had in months. The fear had changed shape. Now it held direction. motion, purpose. Samuel had not returned to haunt them. He had returned to lead them. The next few days changed everything. Thornwell's isolation deepened. He stopped speaking entirely. Sometimes people saw him through the shutter gaps, pacing the building like a trapped wolf. He refused food for long stretches. He muttered to himself in broken whispers. He was not the same doctor anymore. He was unraveling. Rayburn did not know what to do. He could not run the plantation alone. And now that 20 people were dead and Samuel had returned in some impossible form, Rayburn's control over the enslaved community was slipping. Then came the night of the storm. Dark clouds rolled in just after sunset. Lightning cracked across the sky. Rain hammered the earth. Wind howled. And in the middle of that storm, every door of the quarters opened at once. Not because someone called, not because someone ordered, but because every person felt the same thing. It was time. They moved silently through the rain. They gathered near the edge of the fields. Clara held her baby wrapped tight to her chest. Daniel stood beside her. Every face was wet with rainwater and grief and something burning and fierce. A shadow moved between the trees. Samuel stepped out of the woods. His eyes no longer looked empty. They looked determined. He raised his hand and pointed toward the medical building. A place where 20 souls had been taken. A place where pain had been carved into the walls. A place that needed to end. The storm raged. The people of Belmont followed Samuel. This was no longer fear. This was uprising. And the doctor had no idea what was coming. Got it. I'll create an engaging hook first, then write part 7 in simple, clear, suspenseful language, around 1,000 words, no dashes anywhere. Engaging hook. Some stories warn us. Some stories follow us. And some stories wait. Sacred Heart Seminary was one of those stories. The deeper you go, the more it remembers your steps. The halls were no longer quiet. The shadows were no longer empty. And Catherine was running out of time. Because the truth was not hiding anymore. It was coming toward her. Part 7. Night arrived with a heavy silence, the kind of silence that felt alive. Catherine lay in her small wooden bed, staring at the ceiling. The candle on her bedside table flickered, throwing faint light across the room. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the other girls. Their pale skin, their empty eyes, their trembling hands. She knew now that something was happening to them, something they could not fight. She sat up and listened. The building creaked like it was breathing. A soft hum moved through the walls. It was slow and rhythmic. And it was coming from the chapel. Catherine felt her heartbeat quicken. She slid out of bed, placed her feet gently on the cold floor, and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. She opened the door without making a sound. The hallway was dim and cold. A single candle burned at the far end near the staircase. Catherine moved slowly, step by careful step, toward the sound. The humming grew louder. It sounded like a chant. Words she could not understand. Ancient, heavy, deep. She reached the chapel door and paused. Her fingers trembled as she pressed her ear to the wood. The chanting stopped. Silence flooded the hallway. She pushed the door open. Inside, about 20 girls stood in a circle. Their hands were joined. Their heads bowed. Their hair hung loose over their faces. At the center of the circle stood Mother Agnes. Her voice filled the room. Calm, smooth, too calm. You must release yourselves from who you were. You must become what you were meant to be. The girls replied in one soft voice. We obey. Catherine's breath caught. She tried to step back. But the door behind her slammed shut. The sound echoed like thunder. Mother Agnes turned. Her eyes locked on Catherine. You are restless, child. Catherine wanted to run but her legs would not move. Mother Agnes stepped closer. Her face was serene, too serene. The candlelight danced in her eyes. I see your fear. Fear is only the beginning of transformation. Catherine forced her voice out. What are you doing to them? Mother Agnes smiled. A gentle smile. A cold smile. The world outside is corrupt. It poisons the mind. It fills the heart with shallow dreams and sinful desires. Here, we cleanse them. We make them pure. Pure. The word sounded wrong. Heavy. Sad. Catherine looked at the girls. Their bodies were still but their breathing was fast. Their fingers trembled where they held each other. She saw pain in every one of them. This is not purity. This is suffering. Mother Agnes sighed. There can be no transformation without suffering. Every holy thing is born from fire. Catherine shook her head. No, this is control. This is manipulation. For the first time, Mother Agnes' face changed. The calm expression cracked. A shadow crossed her features. But only for a moment. Then she lifted her hand. Girls, open your eyes. They lifted their heads in unison. Their eyes were empty, still, hollow. Catherine's heart dropped. This is devotion, Mother Agnes said. This is what you will become. No, I will never become this. Mother Agnes stepped closer until their faces were only inches apart. Everyone becomes something, child. You will choose your form soon. Then she turned her back and continued speaking to the circle. Return to your rooms. Rest. Tomorrow begins your next cleansing. The girls broke the circle. They walked past Catherine as though she did not exist. Silent, breathless, gone inside themselves. Mother Agnes did not look at Catherine again. Catherine left the chapel and hurried to the hallway. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing was shallow. She leaned against the wall to steady herself. She needed to leave this place. She needed to find help. But no one in town would believe her. And even if they did, the seminary had power, influence, reputation. Who would believe a young novice over a respected mother superior? But she could not stay. She could not let herself become like the others. She made her plan in silence. At dawn, she would leave. She would run through the woods. She would follow the river path. It would be long. It would be dangerous. But it was her only chance. She returned to her room and packed only what she needed. Her rosary, her small Bible, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. She did not sleep. Morning came slowly, pale and cold. The bell rang for morning prayer. Catherine wrapped her shawl tighter and slipped into the hallway. She kept her head down and walked past the prayer room. No one stopped her. She reached the back door. Her hand touched the latch. A whisper came from behind her. Going somewhere, Catherine. She froze. Sister Elena stood there. The girl with soft brown hair. The one Catherine trusted. The one who used to laugh. Her face was pale. Her eyes were empty. Catherine whispered, Elena, please. I have to leave. Come with me. We can escape together. We can find help. Elena blinked slowly. Her voice was flat. There is no outside. There is only the path we are given. She stepped closer. Catherine stepped back. Elena smiled. But it was not Elena's smile. It was something else. We will all be one soon. Catherine ran. She burst through the back door and into the cold morning air. Her feet hit the frozen ground. The wind burned her skin. She did not look back. The seminary bell rang behind her. Not for prayer, for alarm. They knew. They were coming. Catherine did not stop. The woods waited ahead, and somewhere in those trees. So did the truth. If you want, I'll continue with part 8 next. Understood. I'll create an engaging hook first, then write part 8 in simple, suspenseful language, around 1,000 words, no dashes anywhere. Engaging hook. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some places are not meant to be escaped. Catherine thought the woods would save her. But the woods around Sacred Heart had seen too much. They remembered the footsteps of every girl who tried to run. And none of them ever made it out. Now the trees were whispering again. And Catherine was alone among them. Part 8. Cold air cut across Catherine's face as she ran. The forest floor was uneven, covered with roots and fallen branches. Her breath came in sharp bursts. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The morning light was weak. The sky was gray. The trees looked tall and endless. She did not know how long she had been running. Minutes or hours. Time felt strange here. The seminary bell had stopped ringing behind her, but she knew that did not mean she was safe. They would come. Not walking. Not calling her name. Quiet. Always quiet. That was how they moved. She stopped for a moment to catch her breath. Her hands were shaking. Her legs burned. She looked around. The forest looked the same in every direction. Dark trunks. Cold mist. No sign of a path. She whispered to herself, do not panic. You have to think. She remembered the river. Sister Margaret once told her that the river near the seminary flowed east. If she found it and followed it long enough, she would reach the town. She listened. At first, all she heard was wind brushing through leaves. But then, faint and distant, she heard the soft sound of flowing water. She moved toward it. The ground sloped downward. The trees became thicker. The sound of the river grew louder. She felt hope rising in her chest. When she broke through the brush, she saw it. A narrow river, moving slow and steady. Water clear as glass. The banks muddy and wet. Catherine knelt and dipped her hands into the cold water. She drank quickly. The water was sharp and clean. She splashed her face, trying to calm herself. She whispered a prayer. Her voice shook. Please God, let me make it. A sound came from behind her. A branch snapping. Catherine froze. She did not turn around. She did not breathe. The forest had grown too quiet. No birds. No wind. Only stillness. She stood slowly and faced the trees. A figure stepped between the trunks. It was Sister Elena. Her dress was white against the dark woods. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. Her feet were bare. She did not look tired. She did not look cold. She did not look human. Her eyes were still and empty. Catherine whispered, Elena, please, you have to remember who you are. You were kind. You laughed. We talked every night. We prayed together. Please try to remember. Elena blinked once. Slowly. Her voice sounded far away. You cannot run from what you are meant to become. Catherine stepped back. Her shoes sank into the mud. Elena stepped forward, each step silent. Catherine shook her head. No, I will not stay there. I will not become like this. I will not surrender. Elena tilted her head. Her expression did not change. There is no surrender. There is only transformation. Catherine took another step back and her heel slipped. She nearly fell into the water. The river rushed past her legs. Cold and fast. Elena moved closer. You do not have to be afraid. You only have to obey. Mother Agnes will take away your pain. Catherine felt anger rise through her fear. Pain belongs to the living. What she has done to you is worse. She has taken your soul. For the first time, Elena's eyes flickered. Just for a second, something broken, something hurting. Then it was gone. Elena reached out her hand. Come back, before the forest takes you. Catherine turned and ran along the riverbank. Mud splashed up her legs. The cold water sprayed her skirt. She heard footsteps behind her. Soft, too soft, like someone gliding across the ground. She ran harder. Branches scratched her arms. Her breath came out in harsh gasps. She did not look behind her. She could feel Elena there. Close, too close. Then Catherine saw something ahead. A wooden bridge crossing the river. It looked old, crooked, like it might break under her weight. But it was her only chance. She ran onto the bridge. The wood groaned beneath her feet. The sound echoed through the trees. She made it halfway across when she heard the footsteps stop. She turned. Elena stood at the start of the bridge. Her eyes locked on Catherine. Her voice was a whisper carried on the wind. We will bring you home. Catherine stepped backward across the bridge. Each board shook. When she reached the other side, she did not stop running. The forest rose around her like a wall. But she kept moving. She followed the river. She followed hope. Eventually, the trees thinned. The ground became more open. But the silence did not leave. The feeling of being watched followed her with every step. She walked for what felt like hours. Her feet ached. Her throat burned. The sky darkened again. Evening was coming. She could not stop. Not yet. Then she saw it. A house. Small. Wooden. Smoke rising from the chimney. A faint glow of firelight behind the windows. Catherine almost cried. She hurried toward it, stumbling through the tall grass. She knocked on the door with trembling hands. A moment passed. Then the door opened. An old woman stood there. Her hair gray and braided. Her face lined with deep wrinkles. Her eyes sharp and aware. The woman studied Catherine for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. Come in, child. You are not safe out there. Catherine entered. The house was warm. The smell of soup filled the air. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. The old woman closed the door and locked it. Catherine tried to speak, but her voice broke. She sat at the wooden table and tears finally came. The old woman placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I know where you came from. I know what lives in that place. Catherine looked up through her tears. Please, help me. I need to warn others. I need to stop them. The woman's face grew solemn. Stopping them will not be easy. They have been there a long time. Longer than you think. Catherine swallowed. What are they? The old woman stared into the fire. They are not holy. And they are not human. They never were. If you'd like, I'll continue with part 9 next. Alright, here is part 9 with an engaging hook, written in simple, tense, cinematic language, about 1,000 words, no dashes anywhere. Engaging hook. Some truths do not set you free. Some truths break something inside you that never heals again. Catherine thought she finally escaped Sacred Heart. She thought she found safety. But safety was a story for other people. The old woman in the cabin knew the truth. And once Catherine learned it, there was no going back. The past was no longer behind her. It was coming for her. Part 9. The fire crackled in the stone hearth. Catherine sat at the small wooden table, her fingers wrapped around a cup of warm tea. Her hands were still shaking. The old woman sat across from her, watching her quietly. Outside, the night pressed against the windows. The forest had gone silent again. That silence felt alive. The old woman spoke first. Tell me your name. Catherine swallowed. Catherine Hayes. The old woman nodded slowly. My name is Miriam. I have lived near that place longer than any person should. I know what hunts inside its walls. Catherine leaned forward. Then tell me, please. I need to understand what they are. I need to know how to stop them. Miriam stared into the fire. You think they only changed you. You think they only twisted the sisters inside that convent. But it started before them. Before the church. Before the first brick was laid. Catherine felt her chest tighten. What do you mean? Miriam continued. That land was never free. Not ever. They built the convent on ground where older things were buried. People who worshipped something that did not belong to this world. The church thought they could contain it. Purify it. But faith is not always stronger than hunger. Catherine felt cold spreading through her limbs. She whispered, Are you saying the sisters did not choose this? Miriam shook her head. Some chose it. Power calls to certain hearts. But others were taken slowly. Changed from within. At first, they just felt watched. Then they stopped dreaming. Then their voices changed. Their eyes changed. And finally, they lost themselves completely. Catherine closed her eyes. She saw Sister Alina's empty stare. She saw the way the Mother Superior smiled without warmth. She felt the cold fingers around her arm that night in the chapel. Catherine whispered, Why me? Miriam looked at her with deep sadness. Because you still have a soul that fights. That makes you dangerous to them. And that is why they will not stop. They are not finished with you yet. Catherine's breath caught. She looked toward the door, half expecting to see Elena standing there already. Miriam rose from her chair. Come, I want to show you something. Catherine followed her to a small wooden chest near the wall. Miriam opened it and took out a bundle wrapped in cloth. She laid it on the table and slowly unfolded it. Inside was a rosary, but unlike any Catherine had seen. The beads were carved bone. The cross was dark with age. And something about it made Catherine's skin crawl. It felt older than Catholic prayer. Older than the language of Scripture. Miriam said, This belonged to Sister Agnes. The first Mother Superior of Sacred Heart. The one who made the pact. Catherine stared in disbelief. A pact with what? The flames in the hearth flickered hard, like the fire itself recoiled at the words. Miriam whispered, With something that does not speak in words. Something that offered healing and knowledge and control. She took it, and she gave something in return. Catherine felt a tremor move through her body. Souls. Miriam nodded. And she made sure the convent always had new girls. The sick, the orphaned, the desperate, easy to shape, easy to replace. Catherine pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears stung her eyes. I have to stop them. I cannot let this continue. Miriam's voice was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. If you want to stop them, you must go back. You must face the Mother Superior. And you must break what binds her. Catherine's stomach twisted. Return. To that place. To those halls. To those eyes. She shook her head. They will kill me. Miriam stepped closer and placed both hands on Catherine's shoulders. Not if you remember who you are. Not if you hold on to your soul. That is the one thing they can take only if you give it up. Catherine closed her eyes. She breathed slowly. She felt a fire awakening inside her. Fear and courage tangled together. A sudden sound shattered the moment. A knock on the door. Not loud, just one soft knock. Catherine froze. Miriam did not move. Her face went pale. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They found you." Catherine's breath trembled. She turned toward the door. Another soft knock. Then a voice. "Catherine, please. It is cold out here. Let me in." It was Alina's voice. But wrong. Empty and sad at the same time. Like someone remembering how a human should sound. Catherine stepped back. Her whole body shook. Miriam reached for something near the hearth. A long iron poker. She handed it to Catherine. "Do not open the door. Do not speak to it. Do not look at it." The voice outside changed. No longer calm, now softer, more pleading. "Catherine, we miss you. The sisters need you. Mother Agnes prays for you. She forgives you." Catherine held the poker with both hands. Her arms trembled. Her vision blurred with fear and tears. Miriam whispered, "They cannot come in unless you invite them." The voice outside turned slow and sweet. "Catherine, come home." The wind outside shifted. The house creaked. The fire dimmed. Then silence. Catherine did not breathe for a long time. Minutes passed. Finally, Miriam placed a hand on her shoulder. "You must rest. Tomorrow, we plan. Tomorrow, we decide how to end this." Catherine nodded slowly, but inside her heart, something was changing. Not breaking, hardening, taking shape. She whispered to herself before she lay down to sleep. "I am not theirs, and I will not run again." Outside, in the darkness between the trees, something watched the little house. Something patient, something that had all the time in the world. And a voice whispered back, "We will see. Say yes and I will write the final part 10 with a powerful ending and call to action for your YouTube audience. Here's a fully modified version of part 10 of your horror and historic story, written in an engaging style for an American YouTube audience. I've included a gripping hook, a seamless continuation of the Belmont Plantation narrative, and a strong call to action at the end. Engaging hook. The shadows of Belmont Plantation were longer than anyone dared imagine. For decades, the walls had held secrets too horrific to speak aloud. Tonight, we uncover the final chapter of a story that began with curiosity and obsession but ended in unimaginable horror. What really happened in the surgical theater of Dr. Silas Thornwell? The answers will shock you, and what you discover may make you question the very nature of human cruelty. Part 10 Final Chapter. By the summer of 1851, Belmont Plantation had become a house of whispers and dread. The once vibrant fields lay untended as fear paralyzed those who remained. The survivors watched every move of Dr. Thornwell, the man who claimed to heal but only delivered death. Each day brought new terror as he meticulously selected subjects, always noting in his leather-bound journal the time of death, the surgical method, and the animal donor used. 47 people had been subjected to his experiments, and none had survived. The remaining enslaved people had stopped speaking of their fears openly. The occasional cough, the stumble of a worker, the flicker of weakness, all were watched closely. Thornwell's obsession had grown beyond the practical. No longer was he interested in just improving methods or testing theoretical principles. He had begun experimenting with combinations of organs, complex grafts that even the most daring European surgeons of the time would have considered monstrous. By now, even the medical supply merchant Robert Finch and the cautious Drive Edmund Whitlock had begun to sense the full horror of Belmont. Finch had quietly withheld surgical instruments, hoping to slow the pace of experiments. Whitlock had petitioned the medical society repeatedly, though Thornwell's influence ensured that any serious investigation was delayed or dismissed. Meanwhile, life at Belmont was a living nightmare. On a humid August night in 1851, Thornwell selected his 47th subject, a young woman named Lillian. She had been healthy, strong, and full of life, which made her ideal for his latest and most complex experiment. He intended to combine portions of liver and kidney tissue from a ram into her body, a procedure he called integration for optimal vitality. The surgical theater had been prepared with iron restraints, sharp instruments laid out, and the animal ready in its pen, awaiting transfer through the covered walkway. The procedure began with calculated precision. Lillian, sedated and restrained, could only stare in confusion and fear. Thornwell worked with the clinical focus of a man completely divorced from empathy. His hands were steady, his notes meticulous. He referred to Lillian only as Subject 47, marking the time of incision and each step in his journal. Outside, the night was silent except for the faint whimpers that carried through the plantation grounds. Hours passed. Unlike many of his previous subjects, Lillian survived longer than expected. Thornwell's notes indicate moments of hope, brief observations of potential tissue integration. But by midnight, her strength waned. By 2 a.m., she had succumbed to the inevitable failure, acute organ rejection and hemorrhaging. Thornwell documented her death with the same cold detachment as the first 46 subjects. The pattern of destruction was complete. 47 lives had been claimed, all in the name of twisted curiosity and ambition. That morning, the burial details were the same as always: unmarked graves, early dawn, quiet deception for the surviving community. However, this final act could not remain hidden for long. News of the high mortality rates at Belmont had reached the South Carolina legislature. Investigators arrived, examining the plantation, speaking with witnesses, and most importantly, discovering the infamous leather-bound journal. The accounts of the experiments shocked the nation. The precision, the cruelty, and the sheer disregard for human life could scarcely be believed. Thornwell's medical career ended that day. The state legislature ordered Belmont's surgical wing burned to the ground. The charred remains of the building became a grim symbol of scientific ambition unrestrained by conscience. As for the plantation, it was sold off, and the enslaved people who survived eventually gained freedom, carrying with them the memory of horrors too dark to fully describe. The journal, hidden for decades, was eventually donated to a local museum. Researchers pored over the pages, realizing that the experiments conducted there predated modern transplant procedures by nearly a century. But no lessons could erase the tragedy. 47 human beings had been used as instruments of experimentation. Their names, mostly forgotten, were recorded only in the clinical script of a madman obsessed with the impossible. Belmont Plantation stands today only in historical records and whispered stories. Its fields have returned to nature, but the echoes of its past linger. The story of Dr. Silas Thornwell is a cautionary tale, a reminder that ambition untempered by ethics can transform knowledge into horror, and curiosity into unimaginable cruelty. If this story captivated you, and you want to uncover more dark historical mysteries like Belmont Plantation, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share this story so others can remember the lessons hidden in history's shadows, and let's explore these chilling truths together. If you want, I can also create a full YouTube SEO package for this 10-part series, including title, description, viral hashtags, 3-word thumbnail text. This will help it reach maximum engagement. Do you want me to do that next?